The night was quiet, but the silence did not feel safe. Daniel stood at the edge of the forest, his hand pressed against the broken metal of his ship. The supply vessel had crashed only hours ago, flames burning through the trees like wild beasts, before dying out into smoke and ash. He was the only survivor. The stars above looked distant, like cold eyes watching him. His suit was torn, his side ached, but he was alive. For a human stranded on an alien world, being alive was already a victory. Still, he knew survival would not be easy. His rations were lost, his communicator was dead, and the emergency beacon was too damaged to send a signal. He had no choice but to walk. He moved through the forest with care, pushing past tall plants that glowed faintly in the dark. Strange insects hummed, and shadows shifted between the roots of giant trees. Every sound made him tense. He had fought in wars before, but war at least gave him allies. Here, he was utterly alone. Hours passed before he saw the ruins. At first, Daniel thought it was just broken stone, the remains of cliffs falling apart. But as he stepped closer, he saw shapes too deliberate for nature: walls, collapsed roofs, blackened pillars. The smell of fire still lingered. A village had stood here once, but now it was nothing but ash. Daniel slowed, his boots crunching softly over the rubble. The silence of the ruins was heavier than the forest. No birds, no animals, only the faint crack of burned wood. He crouched beside a shattered building and touched the stone. It was not old. The attack had been recent. He could almost see it in his mind. Fire raining from the sky, soldiers moving through the streets, families running, screaming. Something moved. Daniel's hand went to his sidearm, though the weapon was half ruined and hardly reliable. His eyes swept the shadows. Then he saw her. She stood among the broken walls like a ghost from another age. A tall figure, her skin a pale silver tone that caught the starlight, her dark hair falling across her shoulders. Her face was sharp but soft at the same time, carrying a natural beauty that was untouched by war. But her eyes, those were hard, filled with grief and fire. At her feet were two small figures, children. Their faces were frightened, their small hands gripping the edge of her torn robe. For a long moment, Daniel and the alien woman stared at one another. Neither moved. He could feel her suspicion, her readiness to strike if he came closer. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was steady, though heavy with loss. "Human." The word was strange on her tongue, but clear enough. Daniel lowered his weapon, showing he meant no harm. "I'm not your enemy," he said slowly. He hoped she understood. The woman studied him. Her children pressed closer to her legs, whispering in their language. Daniel could not understand the words, but he understood their fear. Then, to his surprise, she stepped forward, not far, only enough to make her meaning clear. Her voice did not tremble, though the words carried sorrow. "I am Salith," she said, "widow of Kerith. These are my children. My people are gone. My enemies will return. I cannot protect them alone." Daniel felt a chill. He had seen war's cruelty before, but something about her tone struck deeper. She was not simply afraid. She was determined. She would fight if she had to, but she already knew the truth. She could not win. She looked at him then, her silver eyes unblinking. "I will share your bed, human," she said firmly. "Just make sure my children live." The words stunned him. For a moment he thought he had misheard, but her gaze was steady. It was not a confession of love or desire. It was a vow of survival, a pact offered in the ashes of her world. She was giving him her life, her trust, even her dignity, all for the sake of her children. Daniel's throat felt dry. He had not expected this. He was a soldier, not a savior. But when he looked at the children, their wide eyes staring up at him. Something in his chest tightened. He could not turn away. "I don't know how long I'll survive here," he admitted quietly, "but if I live, they live." The woman closed her eyes briefly, as if releasing a weight. When she opened them, her shoulders were straighter. She gave a single nod. Without another word, she turned and guided her children into the shadows of the ruins. Daniel followed, unsure where this strange alliance would lead. They stopped at a small chamber beneath the rubble, hidden from sight. A thin fire burned in a hollow of stone, giving the place a dim glow. Salith's children curled against each other, their tired faces sinking into restless sleep. Daniel sat across from her, the fire between them. For a while, neither spoke. He could hear the distant howl of alien beasts outside, but inside, the silence was heavy with unspoken questions. Finally, he asked, "Who destroyed this place?" Her gaze dropped to the flames. "The Cathari," she whispered. "They came with fire and steel. They killed my husband, burned my people, and swore my line would end." She looked up at him, her voice turning sharp. "If they find us, my children will not see another sunrise." Daniel leaned back, his mind racing. He had heard of the Cathari in military briefings, ruthless, proud, and merciless. If they were hunting her, then she and her children were living on borrowed time. But he had made a promise. "I've fought worse odds," he said quietly. "I'll fight for them. I'll fight for you." Salith's eyes softened, only slightly, but enough for him to see the change. For the first time, there was a spark of trust. As the fire crackled between them, Daniel realized the strange truth of his situation. Hours ago, he had been alone, broken, lost. Now, in the ruins of a dead village, he was bound to an alien widow and her children. It was not duty that held him now. It was something far heavier, the promise of a future, no matter how fragile, resting on his shoulders. Outside, the wind whispered through the ruins, carrying with it the scent of ash and the memory of war. Inside, a soldier and a widow sat in silence, their fates tied together by survival and sacrifice. The night stretched on. For Daniel, it was the beginning of something he could not yet name, a journey that would test the strength of both human and alien hearts. Morning light filtered through cracks in the ruined stone ceiling. Daniel opened his eyes slowly, his muscles stiff from sleeping on the hard ground. For a moment, he forgot where he was. Then the memories returned, the crash, the ruins, the silver-skinned widow, and her children huddled together. He sat up carefully. Across the fire pit, Salith was already awake. She sat with her back straight, her eyes half closed as if listening to the sounds outside. Her children still slept against her side, small bodies wrapped in thin cloth. Daniel studied her quietly. She looked different in the daylight. Her face carried the weight of sorrow, but her presence was strong, steady, almost unshakable. She noticed his gaze and spoke without opening her eyes. "You move like a soldier," she said softly. Daniel gave a dry chuckle. "Old habits. They keep me alive." Now her eyes opened, sharp and watchful. "Good. Then they will keep my children. Alive, too." The words were not cold, but they were not gentle either. She was reminding him of the vow he had made, of the pact spoken in the ashes. He nodded. "I keep my promises." They shared a silent understanding. Survival was not about trust or friendship, at least not yet. It was about necessity. Later, when the children woke, Daniel helped Salith gather what little food could be found among the ruins. Strange fruits clung to broken walls, and small creatures darted between the stones. Daniel used a shard of metal from his shipwreck as a makeshift blade, while Salith showed him which fruits were safe and which would poison him. He noticed how quickly her children obeyed her, never questioning, always alert. They were too young to carry the look of soldiers, yet they moved with caution beyond their years. War had already carved its mark on them. One of the children, the eldest, stared at Daniel curiously while nibbling on a piece of fruit. His eyes were the same silver as his mother's, though brighter, untainted by grief. Finally, the boy spoke in a halting voice, mixing his own language with broken human words. "You fight?" he asked. Daniel crouched beside him. "Yes," he said simply. "I fight to keep people safe." The boy tilted his head. "Safe? Like us?" Daniel hesitated, then placed his hand gently over the boy's shoulder. "Yes, like you." The child's face lit with a small but real smile. For Daniel, it was the first spark of warmth he had felt since crashing here. The days that followed were filled with slow, cautious steps toward survival. Daniel and Salith began to move together through the forest, seeking food and safe water. She showed him how her people had used energy snares, small devices hidden in the underbrush to catch animals. He, in turn, taught her how to spot ambush points, how to mask their tracks, and how to listen for sounds that did not belong. Communication was not easy. Their languages were different, but both were clever enough to learn each other's words, through gesture, repetition, and patience. Sometimes Salith grew frustrated when Daniel misunderstood, and sometimes Daniel laughed when his own words came out twisted and wrong. But slowly, meaning grew between them like fragile roots in rocky soil. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Salith watched Daniel sharpening his broken sidearm with care. "Why do you fight?" she asked suddenly. Daniel paused. "Because I have to." That is not an answer. He looked at her across the flames. Her children were asleep again, and her eyes held no softness now, only demand. She wanted truth, not a soldier's mask. After a long silence, he said, "I fight because I've lost people too. Because if I stop, their memory dies with me." For the first time, her expression changed. It softened, just slightly like a crack in stone. She looked away into the fire. "Then we are not so different," she whispered. But the uneasy calm did not last long. On the fourth day, Daniel noticed signs that made his blood run cold. Broken branches where something heavy had moved, deep footprints not made by animals, the faint metallic scent of machines. The Cathari were searching. He hurried back to the ruin where Salith waited with her children. She saw his face and needed no translation. "They are near?" she asked. Daniel nodded grimly. "Too near. We can't stay here." She pressed her lips tight, then gathered her children quickly. There was no hesitation, no argument. She trusted his instincts now, even if she would not admit it aloud. They moved deeper into the forest, guided by Salith's knowledge of hidden paths. The children kept silent, their small feet leaving almost no trace. Daniel carried the youngest when she grew too tired, her small hand clutching his collar as she buried her face against his chest. As night fell, they reached a ridge overlooking a wide valley. From there, Daniel saw faint lights moving in the distance, enemy patrols sweeping the land. His jaw tightened. If they were found, it would mean death. Salith watched the lights too, her face unreadable. Then she looked at Daniel. "My husband fought them," she said quietly. "He fought until his last breath, but they burned him where he stood." Daniel clenched his fists. He had never known Kareth, but in that moment, he felt a surge of respect for the fallen warrior and fury at those who had destroyed him. "We won't let them take the rest of your family," Daniel said firmly. "Not while I'm breathing." Salith's silver eyes met his. For the first time, she gave him a small nod. Not as a demand, not as a reminder of their pact, but as an acknowledgement of his will. That night, as the children slept close together, under a canopy of branches, Daniel and Salith kept watch by turns. The forest was restless. filled with distant roars and rustling shapes. When Daniel's turn came, he sat with his weapon across his knees, staring into the dark. Salith, half awake, murmured softly from where she rested nearby. "You should rest." "I've rested enough," he replied. She studied him in the dim firelight. "You do not act like other humans I have seen in battle. They fight for glory, for conquest. You fight differently." Daniel's eyes stayed fixed on the shadows. "I fight because someone has to. Because no one deserves to die without someone standing for them." There was silence for a moment, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Then Salith whispered, almost too soft to hear, "Then perhaps the stars sent you here for a reason." Daniel said nothing, but her words settled deep inside him. He was no longer just a stranded soldier. He was part of something larger now, an uneasy alliance that might shape the fate of more than just a single family. The night stretched long, filled with danger and uncertainty. But as Daniel sat guard over Salith and her children, a new resolve grew within him. Whatever it took, he would protect them. For the first time since the crash, Daniel no longer felt alone. The next days were restless. Daniel could feel it in the air, the tension, the nearness of danger. The forest was alive with strange sounds. But there was something different now. The cries of birds were fewer, and the ground carried heavier steps. Enemy scouts were drawing close. Salith sensed it too. She often paused while walking, her head tilted as though the wind itself whispered warnings to her. Her children grew quieter, their bright eyes scanning every shadow. Even the youngest seemed to understand that silence meant survival. One evening, while they camped in a hollow of stone, Daniel finally spoke what had been pressing on his mind. "They're searching for you," he said, his voice low. "Not just survivors, specifically you, Salith." Her silver eyes darkened. She stroked the hair of her youngest child, who lay curled in her lap. "They killed my husband because he stood against them. They want his bloodline erased. My children carry his name. To them, that is enough reason to hunt us." Daniel tightened his jaw. He had heard of such cruelty before, empires wiping out entire families to break the spirit of resistance. But hearing it from her lips made it feel heavier. These were not just survivors. They were marked. "So if they find us," Daniel said slowly, "they won't just kill you. They'll kill the children too." Salith nodded once, sharp and certain. There was no need for soft lies. Her honesty was hard as stone. Daniel's hand went to the broken pistol at his side. It had maybe a few shots left in it, hardly enough to face squads of soldiers. He knew he couldn't rely only on weapons. He needed something else. His gaze shifted to the children. They were fragile, yes, but not helpless. Their eyes were sharp, their small hands steady. They had the will to survive, but they lacked guidance. An idea formed in his mind. It was dangerous, perhaps even cruel, but necessary. The next morning, Daniel gathered them together. Salith stood nearby, watching with narrowed eyes as he spoke. "If they come for us, I can't protect you all alone," he said, looking first at the children, then at her. "But I can teach you how to fight back, not like soldiers with guns, but in ways that will keep you alive." The children listened with wide eyes. Salith frowned. "They are only children," she said firmly. Daniel met her gaze. "Children or not, the enemy won't care. If they can't defend themselves, they'll die. You know this." She hesitated. Her hand clenched, her breath tight. Then, at last, she gave a small nod. "Teach them," she said quietly. "Training." Began in simple steps. Daniel taught the children how to move silently, how to step lightly so leaves would not crunch beneath their feet. He showed them how to listen, not just with their ears, but with their whole bodies. The rustle of grass, the break of a twig, the hum of machines, every sound was a clue. At first, the children stumbled. They giggled when they tried to sneak, only to trip over roots. But Daniel did not scold them. He simply repeated the drills, patient and calm. Slowly, their steps grew softer. Slowly, their laughter turned into focus. Salith watched all this with sharp eyes. Sometimes she corrected their posture in her own language. Sometimes she questioned Daniel's methods. But gradually she began to see what he saw. Her children, becoming more than frightened survivors. Next came traps. Daniel showed them how to use simple materials from the forest, vines, stones, branches. He demonstrated how to create snares that would catch small animals for food and how to shape traps that could trip a larger enemy. The eldest child, curious and eager, took quickly to the lessons. He asked questions with broken human words, pointing at tools and making gestures. Daniel answered with patience, his hands guiding the boys until he learned the knot, the pull, the snap. By the end of the week, the children had built a line of snares around their camp. They worked together with quiet pride, their silver eyes bright in the firelight. That night, when one of the snares caught a strange rabbit-like creature, the children cheered softly. For the first time since the ruins, Daniel saw joy return to their faces, but danger was never far. One morning, Daniel spotted a flicker of metal between the trees, an enemy drone scouting low to the ground. He froze, pulling Salith and the children close to the earth. The drone passed above them, its red eyes scanning. When it was gone, Daniel's heart still hammered in his chest. He knew what this meant. The Cathari were closer than ever. That night, by the fire, he told Salith what he feared. "They'll find us soon. No matter how well we hide, they'll sweep the forest. We need to be ready for when they come." Salith stared into the flames, her face shadowed. "You speak like a warrior again," he sighed. "I've been one most of my life, but this time, I'm not fighting for orders or glory. I'm fighting for your children." Her eyes lifted to his. There was no smile, no softness. But for the first time, she gave him a look that carried trust. The next days were filled with even harder lessons. Daniel taught the children how to signal silently with hand signs, how to hide quickly when danger approached, how to use fear as fuel instead of letting it freeze them. At night, he showed Salith how to fire his damaged pistol. She took it in her hands with a steady grip, her face unreadable. When she pulled the trigger and the shot cracked through the forest, her children jumped, but her hands did not tremble. "You've done this before," Daniel said quietly. "My husband taught me," she replied, her voice low. "But I have not held a weapon since his death." She handed it back to him, but her eyes burned with something stronger than sorrow now. One evening, as the children slept, Daniel sat sharpening a blade of scavenged metal. Salith sat across from him, her gaze thoughtful. "You risk much for us," she said slowly. "Why? You could leave. Try to survive alone." Daniel looked at her, then at the sleeping children. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "Because I know what it's like to lose everyone, and I won't let it happen again." Not to them. Her silver eyes lingered on him, filled with unspoken thoughts. She said nothing more, but her silence carried meaning. That night, Daniel dreamed of battles long past, but when he woke, it was not screams or fire that filled his ears. It was the sound of children's quiet breathing, safe beside their mother. For now, but the shadow of war grew closer with every passing day. Daniel knew the moment would come soon, the moment when hiding would no longer be enough, and when it came, he would be ready. The air was heavy that night. The forest seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting. Daniel sat near the fire with his weapon on his knee, his eyes scanning the trees. Salith was awake too, though she tried to let her children sleep peacefully, against her side. Something was wrong. Daniel could feel it in the silence. No insects hummed, no creatures rustled in the underbrush. It was too quiet. "Stay ready," he whispered. Salith's eyes flickered toward him. She didn't ask questions. She trusted his instincts now. The attack came suddenly. From the shadows, a beam of red light cut through the trees. It struck the ground near the fire, sending sparks into the air. The children woke with frightened cries as dark figures emerged between the trunks. Cathari scouts, their armor black, their weapons glowing. "Down!" Daniel shouted, pulling Salith and the children low. He fired his pistol, the blast cracking. Across the forest. One scout fell, but there were more, moving fast. The children clung to their mother, their eyes wide with terror. Salith pulled them behind a fallen log, shielding them with her body. Daniel rushed forward, drawing the scout's fire away. His sidearm hummed with each shot, but he knew its charge was nearly gone. A Cathari soldier leapt from the trees, landing close to the children. Daniel saw the flash of a blade raised high. Without thinking, he ran. The weapon came down, and Daniel threw himself between it and the smallest child. Pain seared across his shoulder as the blade cut deep, but his body shielded the little one completely. With his free hand, Daniel slammed the butt of his pistol into the soldier's helmet. The enemy staggered, and Daniel fired point blank. The soldier dropped. The child screamed, clinging to Daniel's arm. Blood ran down his shoulder, warm and wet, but he stayed standing. He would not fall. Salith's eyes widened as she saw him bleeding, but there was no time to hesitate. She grabbed her late husband's weapon from her pack and leapt into the fight. Her movements were sharp, practiced. For years she had hidden her strength, but now the warrior within her returned. Together, they fought. Daniel fired until his weapon's charge sputtered. Salith struck with her blade, silver hair flying as she moved with deadly precision. The children huddled close, silent now, watching with fearful awe. The forest echoed with battle cries and the clash of steel. One scout after another fell. Finally, the last of them retreated into the trees, their glowing eyes vanishing into the dark. Silence returned. But this silence was different. It was the silence after survival. Daniel collapsed to one knee, clutching his bleeding shoulder. The child he had saved held onto him tightly, sobbing into his chest. Salith rushed to his side. Her hands pressed against his wound, firm but gentle. Her silver eyes burned with something fierce, anger at his injury, but also something deeper. "You, fool," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You risked everything." Daniel gave a weak smile. "That's what you asked of me, isn't it? To keep them alive." Her hand trembled against his shoulder, but she did not argue. Instead, she worked quickly, tearing cloth to bind the wound. The children gathered close, their small faces pale, their eyes fixed on Daniel as though he were something more than human now, something unshakable. When the bleeding was slowed, Salith sat back, her chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. Her eyes never left him. "You saved my child," she said, her voice low, almost reverent. Daniel met her gaze. "I made a promise, and I don't break promises." For the first time since they met, her expression softened, truly softened. The hardness in her eyes melted into something gentler, something vulnerable. That night, after the children finally drifted into uneasy sleep, Salith stayed by Daniel's side. She cleaned his wound again, her hands steady despite the exhaustion in her face. "You are not like my husband," she said quietly. "But you are like him too. He fought with fire in his heart. He gave everything for us. Now you do the same." Daniel shifted, wincing at the pain. "I'm not trying to replace him." "I know," she replied. "But you stand where he stood. You carry his burden. That is something no stranger has ever done. Their eyes met across the firelight. For a long moment, no words were needed. In that silence, a fragile bond was forged, no longer just an alliance of survival, but something stronger. The next day, Daniel insisted on moving despite his wound. Salith protested at first, but he refused to stay still. "If we wait, they'll come back with more," he said firmly. She gave in, though she kept close to him, watching his every step. The children walked silently, their trust in him now unshakable. As they traveled, Daniel began teaching again, though slower now with his injured arm. He showed the children how to build stronger traps, how to use sharp stones as weapons. He guided Salith in reinforcing their shelter when they stopped to rest. Every lesson carried weight. Every action reminded them that the fight was not over. That night, as they sat by a small fire hidden beneath thick branches, Salith spoke again. "When I first saw you," she said, her eyes fixed on the flames, "I thought you were only a broken soldier, a man trying to survive. But now I see more. You are a shield. My children are alive because of you." Daniel listened in silence. He felt the weight of her words, heavy but also strangely comforting. "You don't owe me anything," he said softly. But she shook her head. "You are wrong. I owe you more than I can ever give. My vow still stands, but now it is not only survival. It is choice." Her silver eyes turned to him, filled with something unspoken. Respect, trust, perhaps even the beginning of something deeper. Daniel looked back at her, his chest tight. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, he believed they could face it together. The fire burned low. The children slept peacefully, their breaths soft in the quiet night. Daniel sat awake, his shoulder aching, but his spirit stronger than ever. The forest was still dangerous, the Cathari still hunting, but he was no longer just a stranded human. He was protector, teacher, and ally. And as Salith's gaze lingered on him across the fire, Daniel realized he was no longer alone. What began as an uneasy pact had become something more, something forged in fire, sealed in blood, and carried by trust. The war was not over, but neither was hope. The forest could no longer hide them. Daniel knew it. Salith knew it too. The enemy had followed their trail, and sooner or later the scouts would bring soldiers. To keep running meant exhaustion. To stay still meant capture. They needed a place to make their stand. Daniel found it first. A ruined fortress half buried in the hills, its broken towers rising above the trees like the bones of a giant. Moss covered its walls, and roots twisted through stone cracks, but the structure was strong enough to shelter them. It had once been a watch post, long before the Cathari invasion. Now it would serve as their battlefield. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel led the family inside. The children clung close to Salith, their eyes wide as they stepped into the dark corridors. Daniel studied the layout carefully. One main entrance, 2 collapsed side halls, and a stairway leading to the top wall. It was defensible, but only if they prepared well. "We can't run anymore," Daniel said, his voice calm but heavy. "They'll come soon. Here, we make our stand." Salith looked around the ruined walls, her silver eyes reflecting the dim light. She said nothing at first, only rested her hand on her children's heads. Finally, she gave a firm nod. "Then we fight." The next 2 days became a blur of work. Daniel set traps along the fortress path, hidden pits, sharpened stakes, lines of stones that would roll down the hill when released. He showed the eldest child how to tie snares across doorways and set trip lines to slow advancing soldiers. Salith trained with her late husband's weapon, her movements sharp and graceful. She no longer looked like a grieving widow, but like a warrior reborn. Her children watched her in awe, copying her stance with sticks as if holding real blades. Daniel taught them too, though carefully. He showed the children how to stay low, how to hide behind walls, how to signal silently when danger was near. They could not fight like adults, but they could survive, and even survival would mean victory. At night, they all gathered by a small fire in one of the fortress rooms. The children whispered to each other, their fear slowly giving way to excitement. They spoke of being strong, of standing like their mother and the human. Daniel listened quietly, his heart heavy. He did not want them to be warriors. They deserved to be children. But war had already taken their innocence, and now he had no choice but to prepare them. Salith noticed his silence. One evening, after the children fell asleep, she sat beside him. "You blame yourself," she said softly. Daniel shook his head. "I blame the world that made them fight before they could even grow." Her hand brushed lightly against his arm. "But you gave them hope. You showed them that even hunted, they can still rise." He looked at her, seeing not just sorrow but strength in her silver eyes. For the first time, he believed her words. On the third night, the enemy came. It began with the sound of machines, the low hum of drones circling above the fortress. Daniel tensed, his hand gripping his weapon. Then came the glow of red eyes in the trees, dozens of them. The Cathari had found them. "Stay behind the walls," Daniel ordered, his voice steady. Salith pulled her children close, guiding them to the inner chamber. Then she turned, blade in hand, ready to fight. The first wave of soldiers rushed the hill. They moved fast, but Daniel's traps struck first. Stones thundered down the slope, crushing two before they reached the walls. Others tripped on the snares, falling hard before blasts from Daniel's pistol cut them down. The children huddled, in the shadows, watching wide-eyed as their defenses worked. Daniel's heart pounded, but his focus was sharp. Every trap bought them time. More soldiers came. Red beams lit the night, burning against stone. Daniel ducked behind a wall, returning fire with quick bursts. His weapon's charge was low, but he aimed carefully, each shot finding its mark. Salith moved beside him, her blade flashing. When one soldier climbed over the wall, she struck, fast, cutting him down with fierce precision. Her face was calm, her movements fluid. She fought not as a grieving widow, but as a warrior defending everything she had left. The children whispered in awe. Their mother, the woman who had once seemed only tired and broken, now stood like a shield of fire. The battle raged on. Drones swarmed above, their red lights scanning for targets. Daniel grabbed a shard of broken metal, throwing it with perfect aim into one drone's eye. Sparks flew as it crashed, but the enemy pressed harder. The walls shook with blasts. Daniel's pistol sputtered. The charge almost gone. Sweat ran down his face, blood from his earlier wound soaking his sleeve. Still, he stood. Still, he fought. Then the enemy broke through the gate. A squad of Cathari stormed inside, weapons raised. Daniel stepped forward, ready to take them alone. But Salith moved beside him, her children watching from the shadows. "No more running," she said, her voice fierce. Together they struck. Daniel fired his last shots, dropping two soldiers. Salith moved like a storm, her blade flashing, her body unyielding. The children screamed as sparks and steel clashed, but their eyes shone with pride, too. One soldier raised his weapon toward the children. Daniel saw it and leapt without hesitation. He slammed into the soldier, driving him into the wall. The weapon discharged harmlessly into stone. Daniel fought with fists and steel, refusing to fall until the soldier lay still. When it was over, silence filled the fortress. Smoke hung in the air. The ground was littered with broken machines and fallen enemies. Daniel leaned against the wall, his chest heaving. Salith stood tall beside him, her blade stained but steady. The children ran forward, throwing their arms around both of them. "You did it!" the eldest cried, his small hands gripping Daniel's arm. "You saved us!" Daniel looked down at them, his heart heavy but proud. "No," he said softly. "We saved each other." Salith met his gaze across the children's heads. For the first time, she allowed herself a true smile, small but real. That night, as they rested among the broken walls, Daniel and Salith sat together in the quiet. The children slept between them, safe for now. "You stood with me," Salith said. "Not as a stranger, not as a human, as family." Daniel nodded, too tired for words. He felt the truth of it deep inside. They were no longer bound only by a vow of survival. They were bound by fire, by blood, by trust. And though the war was not yet finished, they had won something greater than a single battle. They had won the chance for a future. Morning broke over the fortress ruins, washing the stones in pale gold light. Smoke from the battle still lingered, rising in thin columns toward the sky. The smell of burned metal and scorched earth clung to the air. Daniel stirred awake slowly, his body aching from wounds and exhaustion. Every muscle screamed, every cut throbbed, but he was alive. More importantly, the children's quiet breathing reached his ears. They were alive too. He opened his eyes to see Salith sitting beside him. She had been watching over him through the night, her blade resting at her side, her silver eyes alert. When she saw him move, a rare softness spread across her face. "You, wake," she whispered. "Still here," Daniel muttered, his throat dry. "Didn't think I'd make it." Salith leaned closer, pressing a hand gently against his bandaged shoulder. "You nearly didn't. But I would not let you fall. Not after what you did." He gave a faint smile. "Guess we're even then." She shook her head. "No. You saved my children when I could not. I can never be even with you." Her words carried weight, but Daniel shook his head again, slower this time. "Salith, family doesn't keep score." Her eyes lingered on him, full of thought, before she looked away. The children woke soon after. Their small footsteps echoed through the fortress as they hurried to Daniel's side. They touched his arm, his chest, his hands, as if to be sure. "He was real. You fought like 10 men, the eldest said proudly, his voice full of awe. Daniel chuckled, though the laugh made his ribs ache. "Felt more like one very tired man." The children giggled softly, their fear forgotten for the moment. They nestled close to him, treating him as though he had always been part of them. Daniel's chest tightened at the warmth of it. He had promised Salith he would keep them alive. Somehow, against all odds, he had done it. The day was spent in recovery. Salith gathered herbs from the forest, using her people's knowledge to treat Daniel's wounds. The poultice stung, but he bore it without complaint. Her hands were firm, precise, yet gentle in ways he had not expected. "Your strength," she said as she worked, "is unlike anything I have seen. You fight as if death does not frighten you." Daniel winced at the sting of the herbs. "Death doesn't scare me. Failing does. Losing them. Losing you. That's what I fear." Her hands stilled for a moment, her breath catching. Then she continued her work silently, though her eyes shone with something deeper than before. By evening, Daniel could stand again, though unsteady. He insisted on helping rebuild a safer shelter within the fortress walls. Salith scolded him for moving too soon, but he only smiled. "If I sit too long, I'll rust." Together, they and the children cleared debris, stacked stones, and prepared. Food. It was a simple rhythm, almost peaceful after so many days of fear. The fortress no longer felt like a place of death, but like a place of beginning. That night they sat around a small fire, The stars stretched wide above them, shining clear through the broken roof. The children fell asleep quickly, safe between their mother and the human. For a while, Daniel and Salith simply watched the fire burn. Finally, she spoke, her voice low. "When I first saw you," she said, "I thought you were a wanderer, another soldier lost to war. I offered myself because I was desperate, because I had nothing left but my children." Daniel listened silently. But now, she paused, her eyes meeting his. "Now I see more. You did not just protect them. You gave them hope. You gave me hope." Daniel's heart stirred at her words. "You gave me something too, a reason to keep going. Before I met you, I was only surviving. Now, I feel like I belong." The firelight danced across her silver skin as she reached out, her hand brushing his. It was a simple touch, yet it carried the weight of everything they had endured together. "You are no longer only human to me," she said softly. "You are part of us, part of my family." Daniel's throat tightened. He had been called many things in his life: soldier, survivor, wanderer, but never family. Not like this. He closed his hand over hers. "Then I'll stay, for as long as you'll have me." For the first time, she smiled, a true smile, small but radiant, carrying both strength and warmth. The following days brought quiet. The Cathari had retreated, at least for now. Perhaps they believed the line of Kareth had finally ended, or perhaps they feared the cost of returning. Either way, the forest grew peaceful again, the birds returning, the winds carrying softer songs. Daniel helped Salith teach the children more skills, not just how to fight or hide, but how to live, how to build shelters, how to find clean water, how to work together. He watched them grow more confident with each lesson, their laughter returning like sunlight after rain. At times, he caught Salith watching him, not with suspicion, not with grief, but with something gentler: respect, gratitude, and perhaps the beginning of something neither of them had dared to name. One evening, as the sun set in crimson light, Salith stood at the fortress wall, gazing across the valley. Daniel joined her, his shoulder still sore but healing. "What now?" he asked quietly. She did not turn at first. "Now we rebuild, not just a home, but a future. For my children, for us." Daniel nodded slowly. "I'll help, whatever it takes." Finally, she looked at him, her silver eyes reflecting the fading light. "You already have." They stood there in silence, side by side, watching the sky darken into night. For the first time since the war began, the future did not feel like a distant dream. It felt real. It felt possible. Later, as the stars filled the sky, Salith lay with her children, their small bodies curled against her. Daniel lay nearby, listening to their gentle breathing. His eyes drifted closed, his last thought carrying him into sleep. He had come to this world alone, broken, with nothing but ashes around him. Now he had a family. Not born of blood, but forged through fire, loss, and unshakable will. And as long as he lived, he would keep them safe. For that was the promise he had made, and it was a promise he would never break.